There's an argument to be made that we're a little too connected now. Social media, shared content, the endless scroll, smart devices, the list goes on. But I want folks to remember how things were over 20 years ago, when the internet wasn't the utility that it is today. It was undiscovered country, and those who had the means to log on were in search of online communities where people from all over the world could connect on subjects that they were interested in. I remember the first time I ever dialed into a bulletin board service, not realizing long-distance charges would rack up and get me in trouble with my parents. By the end of the 90s, a lot of my generation enjoyed instant internet access when they got onto college campuses, and being quote-unquote online became a normal thing. It became a normal thing to develop friendships with people you'd never met before, thanks to message boards. In this two-part season finale of A Brief History of Triangle Sports, we will revisit what it was like to be a part of that community and how message boards provided a runway for some websites to become legit coverage outlets for NC State and North Carolina.
The Triangle has the most unique landscape for sports. 3 major universities along Tobacco Road with rabid fan bases, a Stanley Cup champion, an NFL team right down the road, and heavily invested transplants. Not to mention an interesting mix of sports teams that were. Joe Ovius brings you a brief history of Triangle Sports, a candid conversation with those who help shape why sports matters here.
The earliest sports-related message boards that I can remember were ACCboards.com, which was a hub for a bunch of ACC teams, and the Wolf Web. Now, the Wolf Web was more of an all-purpose site with all sorts of boards. Chit Chat and Lounge, those are probably the most popular ones, but there was a sports talk section, and a guy who loved skewing online polls in NC State's favor. His name is Ken Warner, and he's the lone caretaker of what's left of this internet relic.
So you're a freshman in 2000 at NC State. I'm actually getting ready to enter my senior year, the fall of 2000, and I was working at WKNC, the college radio station at the time. And I remember R.I.P. Andrew Payne. He came to me. We're going to talk to these people about BrentRoad.com. It's a message board that's focused solely on NC State people. If you're an NC State person, for students, this is what this message board is about. When did you have when did BrentRoad.com/the Wolf Web come into your orbit, Ken?
Yeah, I first heard about it freshman year in 2000. The Brent Road party was still pretty much a thing then. And, I heard a lot of the chatter. So I probably went to the website that first year and heard about it, throughout. But I didn't get involved until a little bit later, but it was definitely a presence.
Okay, it was a presence. So I think you started posting probably or lurking in like 2002, right? But it's one thing to be a lurker or a poster. I lurked for the longest time on the Wolf Web. I'm pretty sure I still have an account, and I wouldn't have no idea how to recover my password at this point. Who were these guys that created this website? What was their goal?
Yeah, so the 2 guys who started the site are Jake and Joe, and a lot of it really was just about talking about the Brent Road party and kind of keeping in touch with that group of that social circle. Mm-hmm. And when I joined, it was very clear that the people who were on the site, they all knew each other. It took a while to figure out who the characters were and how they all knew each other. But that was definitely the origin.
Okay. And you started, you were a moderator? Is that what was going on? Is that how you got more involved?
So, yeah, initially for the first couple of years, I just started, posting and kind of getting to know the people on the site. I started to get a reputation when I started skewing online polls for the sports teams. And then, a couple of years later, due to my reputation, I moved more into a moderator position that I kind of snuck my way into because the door was wide open. Mm-hmm. But initially it was just hanging out like everybody else.
So what do you mean a reputation? I guess everybody had a reputation. People had their thing on the message board. So when you said you had your reputation, what was it? A poll skewer?
Yeah. So yeah, basically. So whenever a poll would come out, the sports talk message board, which was very active, mm-hmm. Somebody would post a link to a poll and everybody would go in and vote for NC State or Phillip Rivers or whatever the poll was for. And I majored in computer science, so I figured out a way to write bots to submit as many votes as we wanted and was pretty effective at that. So whenever a new poll came out, they were, calling me out, looking for some help, and that was a lot of fun.
When did you retire from poll skewing?
Basically, when the poll makers got too smart for it, they started adding, throttling to the number of votes that could come from like an IP address and stuff like that. So after that, I kind of gave up and had moved on to more professional uses of my skills.
Okay, all right, that makes a lot of sense. So were you part of the group that also hijacked News 14 during the snowstorm and all the closings?
So one of the members posted the thread, and I was maybe 10 minutes later the first person to respond to that, saying, "Oh, this could get bad." And everybody caught on, and we had a good morning that day.
Right. So just thinking about it's making me laugh again because of the ridiculous things that were being submitted to the crawl.
Oh, yeah.
For those who are listening to this wondering, what the hell is Ovius talking about? Well, see, now if there's a snowstorm and there are closings, you just go to WRAL.com and you get the list of closings for everything else. That's how they're submitted. But back then, when the internet wasn't so readily available for everybody, you would watch TV and they would have this scroll of all the businesses that are closed or the schools that are closed with a number. And I guess you guys on the Wolf Web decided, all right, we know how to submit it. And you identified News 14 as the one to go after. And there was everything from the mundane, like, called Jenny at 867-5309. But there are some more risque things that got put on News 14, right?
Oh, yeah. I would say the majority of them tended to skew in that direction.
Do you miss those days of the internet? Because it was a Wild West back then, man.
Oh, yeah. It was definitely a Wild West. Things have definitely changed, and it's still pretty wild today in a lot of ways.
Sure,
but back then, yeah, it was very, people were still trying to figure out, like, let alone security, like how to build community, like what kind of features can we build, and not really thinking of how people were going to, like, look for opportunities to take advantage of it.
So about that community, the Wolf Web still exists today. You actually own the Wolf Web. Why? Why in a day and age where it's you can easily get on a Slack group, you can get into, and if you want to be an old and be on a Facebook group, there are so many ways to connect with people now outside of a message board. So why now is the Wolf Web still? Is it an archival thing, as a register of how things used to be 20 years ago, or is there still an active community that exists today?
There's still an active community. It's small for sure, but it's still there. And to be clear, like, we have a Facebook group, we have a subreddit, we have a Slack instance, and over the years, I'll kind of check in with the community and say, y'all are still here. I'll still keep it running, but if y'all are ready to move on, like, we can, pull the plug and, thank you for your service, the Wolf Web, but people still want to hang out, so we still keep it running.
So this is a bit of a passion project for you. I mean, like by 2007, 2008, I'm guessing a lot of the site features were busted. Servers get old.
Yeah.
How much work have you put into just maintaining the website since?
Yeah. So the first couple of years when I took over the site officially, I did a fair amount of work. I got a new server. Our database performance was terrible. We were having errors all the time. So some of the school features I fixed, like we have like a place where people can, look for reviews on classes at state, sell books. I fixed those for a year or two, but by 2008, 2009, our student population wasn't growing. They had all, been attracted to Facebook and Twitter and Reddit. So, and I had actually rebuilt a new version of the site in the spirit of, modern social media at the time. But, people had been using the Wolf Web the way it was for, almost 10 years, and they were happy with what it was, and they didn't want to see it, go through a lot of changes. So we just kept it the same. And in the years since, I actually retired retired from maintaining the Wolf Web in 2012.
Okay.
And I tried to find some people in the community to take it over. And then, it didn't work out, so I just kept it going. But for the last 10 years, it's been mostly on autopilot. Every now and then I have to come in and fix a few things. But it's an old school site. It runs very easily by itself.
So during the height of the Wolf Web, there's some other, I guess, would be considered problematic things that would occur, back then that we're not thinking of it clearly because it's all new and whatnot. Like, for instance, I'll refer to the University Towers cinema that was the adult film that showed up on the Wolf Web. If I remember correctly, it was a situation when I was on campus. It actually was on the peer-to-peer networks first. Now,
that's right.
Why I remember this is the dumbest thing ever. I remember it being an 80 meg file, okay? An 80 meg file in, 99, 2000 or whatever that was? That was a substantial size for a file.
Oh, yeah.
You can take a movie now that's going to be a gig and transfer it to another phone like in 2 seconds, right? But 80 megs on a dial-up back in the day was serious. So the only way it really would get to be viewed was through the T1 connections from dorm to dorm, okay? Do you remember how it ended up on the Wolf Web? And it went, out into the open? Because it was a campus-only thing. But the Wolf Web opened it up to the masses. Do you remember any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely remember that was a very popular topic of conversation and spectatorship at the time. But, these things, it's human nature to share things that are of interest. So, it kind of just made its way through the university.
The reason why I bring it up is, did you ever find yourself in a situation where you had to pull something? That this was too much. Like that existed, and I think it still exists. I think the posts still exist on the Wolf Web for that particular University Tower story. But did you ever find yourself in a situation going, this is too much, and you actually had to take things down?
Yeah, for sure. And that was one of the hardest things about kind of being in charge of the site is, this kind of moral judgment on what is allowed and what's not. And we're still having that conversation in social media today.
Mm-hmm.
But for sure, and there are legal, avenues that people take to pressure site owners to remove content.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time, if they're reasonable, I'll go along with it. But, a lot of time people, they screw up something in their life, or, they want to hide that. And, that a lot of time that's open, for people to talk about. There's been people who have come to me years later saying, here's a picture I posted, when I was a sophomore.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get a job right now. Can you help me out and take this down?
Yeah.
And those are usually pretty benign. We do have a premium subscriber area. So a lot of times, if it's kind of borderline, I'll just move it in there. And so people can still talk about it if they want, but it's not public anymore.
Okay. But I also feel like the Wolf Web was another one of these proto moments of online dating where rather than meeting somebody at Mitch's or East Village or at a frat party or at a dorm party or whatever, you kind of find yourself intrigued by somebody's posts, and then you slide into the personal messages, the PMs, not the DMs. So, right. I mean, I'm guessing of several instances of people actually getting not just hookups, but actually getting married because they met on the Wolf Web?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it'd be a very common topic of conversation, people flirting online and, you knew who was, interested in who, and, that little dance happens in front of everybody, just like, at the bar. But yeah, I've personally gone to several weddings of people who, either met through the Wolf Web or, really established their friendship and relationship there. So it's it's a powerful thing. Human nature is gonna, find a way.
Yes, I was going to say, we're going Dr. Ian Malcolm here. Life finds a way. But
right.
these things, life can also spill out onto these message boards as well. So, yes, you have some success stories, but I'm sure there's more failures through dating on the Wolf Web than there were not. So I'm guessing there was some drama that would spill out in chit chat and things like that.
Yep. Yeah. That would happen very frequently. I mean, sometimes it would get pretty spicy.
Okay.
And it would be a topic of conversation for years on end. We had one couple that split up, and one of the involved parties was very active with other people on the site behind closed doors. So, that kind of thing happens. Arguments and people calling each other out on the site, and people just flock to drama, So, we got a lot of clicks out of that kind of thing.
Did you, when this was all happening, did you think that this would, I guess in looking back, you were kind of getting a taste of how things are now 20 years later?
Oh yeah, for sure. And it's funny because people talk about this stuff, today, but, people who have been on social media in the old days, we've seen it all. I mean, like nothing really has changed. It's just a bigger scale, different flavors, different features, different ways of like being a terrible or awesome human to each other. So
it's the point of this conversation in this episode of A Brief History of Triangle Sports is that what we're dealing with today is not necessarily a new phenomenon. It's just a different platform in which these things are going on. And we'll close the conversation on this. As you still run the site and you still have the association with the site, what would you like the lasting legacy of the Wolf Web to be?
Yeah, and I think it really is a reflection of that human nature and, the good and the bad, because life is good and bad, and we've experienced it all, and there's dignity and, something to appreciate in that. And, the people who are still around who, and we have people come back years later and say, like, they'll talk about their memories of the site, and, it's just a part of, traversing this world together.
James Henderson, who runs Inside Pack Sports, has been covering NC State athletics for over 20 years, and a prime example of how message boards pave the way for legitimate business. He was part of the original StateFans.com, which eventually turned into what you know as Pack Pride. He's read all sorts of crazy things on the boards, all of which is met with Henderson's signature shoulder shrug for it all. All right, so you and I are at NC State around the same time.
Mm-hmm.
You're there from what, 98 to 03?
Mm-hmm.
I was there 97 through 01. I was not hanging around the football program.
Right.
I was hanging out at WKNC trying to get, reps for this,
There you go.
playing music, all that kind of stuff. You found yourself kind of tied in with the football program around this time. So what are you doing at this point?
Yeah, I was actually at NC State. I was working towards an accounting degree, finance degree. That's what my major was. And it's like I told you, I had a couple buddies out of high school who were football managers, and, those guys are around the program 24/7. And so when you get to college, you know how it was coming into high school, your first friends in college are your high school friends that went to school with you. So that first semester, a year or so, I'm with those guys nonstop, and I get around the team, some of the players on the team. You get to know them because they know them, and it just kind of sprung from there. When I was at State, I feel like I lived at Carmichael more than anywhere, right? Like I was in, I played sports in high school, and then when you get to college, and I don't even want to talk about my last couple of years. I skipped class to go to the gym. It was just crazy.
Hey, look, I skipped class to go to the radio station.
Yeah. So, but because of that, you just build these relationships. And I think for me, it's always been about relationships, getting to know people, and ultimately led to where I'm at now. But yeah, it got me to where I was able to get some really good connections with the football and the basketball team. And I would go on the forums at that time. I'm a 20-year-old college kid at that point. I'm just throwing stuff up there, not thinking anything about it.
So how did you figure out where the forums were? Like, how did you stumble across ACCboards.com or the statefans.com board at that time?
Yeah, for me, it's something that I'd always been attracted to, recruiting, right? Like,
Okay.
I just the information with it was always fascinating to me, knowing where kids were going, or knowing where they'd ultimately go to college, what they were doing in high school. I grew up right outside of Lillington, and we would get the Fayetteville Observer, and Thad Mumma. I don't know if you know that name. He
Yes.
he was a writer who did weekly recruiting updates just nationally, and at that time it's just newspaper. And I know people listen to this may be like, what? But I mean, there was no internet.
A programming note: there actually is an episode featuring David Glenn, formerly of the ACC Sports Journal, and how went from the poop sheet to that. It was actual newspaper. It was an actual newsletter, not an email newsletter, but actual newspaper newsletter. So yeah, all these things kind of are around, but the internet's just coming up. I mean, it's still kind of like a novel idea. I'm still using Telnet to like check out my email in SIME in the computer hall, right? So clearly, there's like this frontier boards. People want that information, and they're kind of finding it. It must have to be new and exciting that you're with like-minded people on a message board talking about NC State insider information.
Yeah, it was fascinating. I mean, it was fascinating the way you could connect. I mean, I even now I've got a couple of friends I met on those forums that I still hang out with. One of my best friends, I met him on one of those forums. Well, I think it was ACC Boards.
Yeah, ACC Boards.
We're good friends now. We still go to, we still hang out, watch games together. I mean, to me, that's what attracted me to it, was the community.
Okay. So when did it become like, wait a minute, this is fun, this is information. These newsletters have kind of carved out a business. People are clearly interested. How can we make some money off of it? So when did you kind of transition into just kind of being a poster on a message board to, hey, I might be just doing this for a living?
Honestly, I'd never thought about it. I think it was 2002. I was going into I think this was my 5th year, right? Like, that extra year of eligibility at NC State.
All that time with the gym paying off.
Yeah. I just stretched it out a little bit. Let me go ahead and drop this course load down to the minimum and slide on out of here. But, so I was going into my last year, and I had been doing that at the time. It was statefans.com. And the two owners over there at the time, they reached out to me. They saw what I was doing on the board. And I had kind of built, like, some folks that recognized what I was saying was legit. And so they reached out to me and just said, hey, we're looking at making this even more legitimate, go covering it news-wide, maybe start covering the team more in depth. If you're interested in doing this, this is something that we could do with you here. And I was just like, okay. Even at the point, I didn't think it was something that would be long-term, right? Like, I was working towards getting an accounting degree. And so we discussed it. We talked about just a starting salary. They made it, and they had enough income where they could front it at the beginning. And then that's kind of how we started. We made it a premium. We went and made it a premium content type website, and it just went from there.
But it also turns into a little bit of a Wild West, right? State Fans eventually becomes Pack Pride.
Yeah.
You look at Inside Carolina, which was kind of born out of a variety of other message boards, and guys like Ben Sherman and Buck Sanders coming together to create what became that website in the early 2000s. There's like publishers behind the scenes. There's a Rivals connection, a Scout connection. There's CBS Sports. I always feel like every couple of years there's this weird changing of hands as to who's running these affiliate websites and what exactly they're doing. And even eventually you broke off and have your own thing with Inside Pack Sports. So what was that Wild West back in the day?
Well, if I'm speaking blunt about it, what you had were rich guys building networks and selling them, disappearing for a year or so, and then starting up another one.
Okay.
Right? That's really, look, guys like Shannon Terry and Jim Heckman, made millions for a reason.
Okay.
And that's the deal is, you start Rivals, you get it to where you want it, you sell it to Yahoo, you disappear for a little bit, you may start 247, or you may start Scout, build that one up, right? And now this is kind of where it's at. So I think that the thing about it that's interesting is you had a lot of I think site stability.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, when I was at State Fans, we knew to get to where we needed to get to at that time, we couldn't be independent.
Mm-hmm.
You needed to be a part of a network because of connections in terms of contacts with recruits. National analysts, like at the time, Scout had Dave Tellep, great guy, local guy who was just a big name. So I knew if we go and join Scout in some way, we'd have connections now on the basketball side with Dave Tellep, which would help us. And so that played a role in us joining a network, and you get the backing from it, the support. But ultimately, for me, like you said, I'm independent now because I was able to have that job for a while. But really, there wasn't a ton of turnover relative to the site once we got on with Scout at that point. We just kind of stayed with Scout throughout.
You weren't credentialed, though.
No, not initially. No, I remember at the time, I think it was 2003, my first full year. So at that point, I went full time with those guys. I graduated, and they put me on a full time salary, but we were not credentialed, and I had to go.
That was a fight. That was these were things. It's weird because people. This is an important part of the context.
It is.
If you go to a recruiting-based website like Pack Pride or Inside Carolina or Inside Pack Sports, like your website now, it is viewed as almost like a. And I don't mean this in a dismissive way.
I know.
It almost is like is an arm of the program.
Sure.
Okay. You're in the recruiting news, but you're also promoting NC State in a weird sort of way.
You're not going to be a UNC graduate running Inside Pack Sports, right?
No. You're going to be viewing everything through the lens of how does this benefit NC State?
Right. You try to, I know I get it all the time. A lot of folks tell me I'm too objective. James, you're too devil's advocate. You're too.
This is why I like you.
Yeah, you're too I've got state fans. A lot of state fans may not agree with my takes at times because for instance, I'll give you an example. Going back to the baseball thing where everybody wanted to pile on the NCAA last year. There was a lot of stuff NC State did they could have done differently.
Yes.
And if we're looking at it from that point, you can say that. And so I've tried to be that way, but you're right. I think a lot of it is viewed that way. And I remember, man, that first year when I reached out I went and sat with Annabelle. She was Annabelle Vaughn at the time.
Annabelle Myers.
Yeah, Annabelle Myers now. And I asked her about getting credentialed, and she wouldn't credential us because at that point, and that's another thing that was really cool or interesting about this, is at that point, these websites weren't getting credentialed.
Yeah.
And so I had to kind of prove we were in it for the long haul, prove we were trying to be legitimate. So it took me a year. She gave us like a year of putting out content before she would credential us.
Yeah, there was gatekeeping. Heck, there was even gatekeeping on the radio side of things. We weren't viewed the same way as a newspaper. We weren't viewed the same way as a television outfit, back in my 850 The Buzz days.
Thinking back on it, that I remember the most from that time. You got to remember, I was 22, right out of college, and Chip Alexander is there. It's crazy because there were so many newspapers at that time, and now, like you mentioned, you go to a game and cover it, or it's not like that anymore. It's more of us than them, and it's just odd thinking about how that's viewed now, how it is. Almost 20 years later, because back then it was like, I don't want to say we were the outcasts, but you get what I'm saying. It was just you had the newspapers, and then you had a couple of guys like us, and now it's kind of flipped. And so I don't know what that says. I don't know if it's maybe the community aspect of it has proven to outlast time up to this point, because that's really what I was always trying to build, is just a community of followers. And so you kind of feel like if you had folks that believed in that what you were saying was legitimate and true, that they would follow you kind of wherever you were, right?
About that community, because you can't talk about these websites, your website, without talking about the message boards themselves. Okay, you go back to ACC boards. I'm on Archive. I'm on the Wayback Machine right now, and they take snapshots. I'm actually looking at a snapshot from April of 1999. Yeah, I'm seeing things about ACC web rings that take you to JP Sports, things that just don't exist anymore, right? And I'm looking at the NC State one specifically, and it has moderators. Zeke.
Yeah.
Do these ring a bell? Zeke
is on our board now. Yep.
WTNY and Beowulf.
Yes.
Do you know any of these guys?
Personally?
Personally.
I know Zeke, yes.
Okay. Yeah. So this is what I find interesting, because part of your job in the old State fans days, and even now, was kind of not moderating these message boards, but especially on the premium side of things, being involved, being a part of that community. So there's some unhinged stuff on the message boards, though. There are some, I heard XYZ. How often would you see a post where I heard from this, or I'm hearing some sort of rumor? Would you pursue? Would you pursue all of them? Were there some that were so ridiculous that you knew that they weren't true? Like, how would you process that?
It's interesting. Like, for me, I always felt like the ones I should pursue were the ones that seemed the most unrealistic.
Okay.
Because I don't know. I always had a thought process that someone's not going to throw something out completely random. One example, Bo Hines, when he was at NC State, receiver 2015. Into the season, he had just been, I think, ACC all-freshman team.
Oh, yeah, there was
I remember
Bo Hines was he was going to be a shooting star at State,
right.
Man. Yeah.
And randomly, I saw a post on a forum, and it was Bo Hines is transferring to Yale. And you're like,
Yale?
Yeah, but my thought process is, who the hell would make that up?
Yeah.
Like, that has to be something to follow up on, right? Like, who would make that up, right? And so you follow up on it, and, okay, there's some smoke here. And then come to find out he ends up at Yale.
All right. And then you also have the UNC scandal, which the message boards were a huge source of information. You got Wolf Juan, what is it, Manalishi, or however, all these guys. Do you know those? Did you know those guys personally, or do you know those guys personally?
I got to know them, yes.
Okay.
But I did not know them personally, a couple of those guys prior to that. But that was one of the things, and full disclosure, I stayed out of that. Like, I wasn't involved in that. It was just crazy to see folks referencing Pack Pride at the time, which is where I was at, and running that site in relation to that UNC scandal. And folks would come in. I would get emails from random reporters asking me for information on this. I'm like, look, I have nothing to do with that. Like,
and that's what I was getting at. And this has always been a fascinating part for me, because if you work for a company like I do, Capital Broadcasting, if I tweet something, there is it's like if I tweet something crazy, or I'm violating some sort of private information or whatever it is, that can come back to me, right? So in the case of the UNC scandal, and you've got transcripts or people pointing out various things that are going on at UNC. Were there conversations with management going, hey, what's our liability with some of the stuff that's being produced on the message boards from anonymous people?
No.
None. You just let it fly.
Just let it fly.
Okay.
I mean, I honestly didn't think anything of it, and we didn't, and in our discussions about it at the time, it was kind of crazy to think you're on your own board. Watching and reading information about something, and you're learning information from it.
Interesting.
And that's how it was for us. We didn't view it. It's crazy thinking about that now, thinking back. I mean,
hey, man, I think back on that time and finding myself on blogs where people supposedly had information. I mean, I remember having to chase down some blog post where a guy said, at that point, you have to believe it, because there's all sorts of other stuff that are proven to be true coming out of the web, right? So I remember there was one about some guy who was out of market talking about how he had a source in Greensboro in the ACC offices that were telling him about, oh, well, yeah, Carolina's going to be fine. They're only going to have like 2 guys suspended, XYZ. This will all be over. The famous line, it'll all be over by Friday, right? Of course, it never ended on that Friday. It just kept on going. So you find yourself chasing these little threads online. I mean, look, you can go back, NC State specifically, where both the message boards and blogs, this is before social media, were the source of all sorts of speculation in Herb Sendek's departure to who the head coach was going to be, and that insane Lee Fowler coaching search, right?
Yeah.
So at that point, how much of this is you doing your own reporting on the premium boards and providing those particular nuggets, and how much of that was chasing down, what insiders might know?
I tend to do my own stuff, right?
Okay.
Like, I mean, a lot of times if I get a tip, like I mentioned with you on the Bohines,
Yeah.
if I see something on the boards like that, I'll run it down. But a lot of times with coaching searches and different things like that, you kind of have different folks you feel like you can go to and talk to them about. And whereas it seems to me that when that stuff arises on your forums, it's more folks are asking you for information on that, right? Like, but yeah, there's always guys who you can get a sense for seem to have connections that maybe you'll end up reaching out to. Like, I know even on our forums right now, there's 3 or 4 posters who, when they post something, even I listen because I know who they are and I know who they can reach and who they talk to. And so now they don't post often, right? But when they do, you kind of know, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. And so sometimes even now, like if something happens and I hear something, I may go and reach out to them, shoot them an email. But a lot of times for me, I feel like I kind of had built enough relationships with folks that I could go to on my own and talk to them about it.
What do you think is the lasting appeal of the message board? Because you've got Twitter, instant reaction. You can find your community. You can start a Facebook group. I mean, there's all sorts of different ways that you can interact with like-minded fans now. You can even start your own podcast if you want to and create a community in that regard. But message boards, I mean, we're talking about message boards that are nearly 25 years old. We're talking about the early days of the internet breaking through mainstream that in some shape or form are essentially the same. They have the same kind of cadence. They have the same, you can add all the emotes you want, but ultimately it's a message board. What do you think the lasting pull of the message board is?
I think it's the community feel. I think it's the I struggle with this when you're constantly trying to make sure, okay, I'm staying on top of things because I mean you don't want to end up being the VCR, right?
Yeah, I mean people are on Reddit, people are on Discord, those types of things,
definitely.
right?
And so you want to continue to at wherever you're at, make sure you have a community feel. I think the thing that I feel right now, at least over these last 20 years, as we've seen these forums stay around, maybe it's just the folks are still the same folks.
Just older,
right? And so that's kind of, if you want to look at what would worry me long term, and I mean, look, long term, I don't, however long we are, right?
I don't know what I'm doing,
right? But what are these young kids into right now? Whereas when I was in college, we're talking about these forums came about when me and you were both 20 to 25. Now we're 40 to 45, and so it's something else going to come around. But I think for our age group. And it seems like a lot of the folks who are still really active on these forums are around our age group or older. This is what we knew.
Do you ever get the sense that there's a true fan sentiment that occurs in those message boards? Like if people are really upset with the coach, do you think they're just venting at that point in time? Or do you think the coach has truly lost a portion of the fan base?
Oh, he's lost a portion of the fan base.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
so we look at Dave Doran, right?
Yeah, and Dave, look, I mean, you talk about turnarounds, right? But I'll give you an example. I remember when Herb was here, I had a guy tell me, and, Herb had started off bad, then he had the 5 straight tournaments. I had a guy tell me during that 5 straight run, he didn't care if Herb or NC State won a national championship, he wanted him fired. I mean, told me that. And, I mean, at that point, for me, and I don't know, at that time I was probably 26, 27, it dawned on me that, like, for some, once a fan reaches a ledge or a breaking point, he's done.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned Dave, and Dave, I think, has won back a lot of those fans.
But you know what's going to happen if they lose.
Yeah, no doubt.
Those people will be right back.
Yeah.
They'll be right back.
And that's, why they're fanatics, right?
Mm-hmm.
For me, one of the forums, if you go to Inside Pack Sports, to where really when you talk about the knockdown, drag-out fights we have, is our water cooler forum.
Mm-hmm.
It's a political, non-sports forum.
I could see that.
Yeah, and it can get dirty.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's a part of the appeal when you get to vent and frustration. And again, why can forums like this stay around message boards? You got the ability to talk about stuff like that as well. But yeah, I think fandom, man, it's interesting. I have one guy. I'm not going to name his name. We banned him from our forum probably 18 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I kid you not, he probably DMs me 4 or 5 times a week,
mm-hmm.
just commenting on the programs.
You just can't let it go.
He can't let it go. I mean, I don't never reply. I don't ever
not.
respond, but like literally every other day or every day, it's Kevin Keats is this, Dave Dorn is this, such and such is this. We aren't good, and I'm like, man.
I've known James Curl since we were students at NC State in the late 90s. He and I were part of the student media contingent based on the third floor of Witherspoon Student Center. He was at Technician, the student newspaper. I was at WKNC, the student-run radio station. James is one of the chillest dudes I know in person. But when James gets online and the Wolfpack are playing, he turns into something completely different. Funny thing is, he's turned that online persona into a pretty decent podcast run that's still going today.
I tried to log in preparation for this conversation and I could not gain access to it. Apparently, I've forgotten whatever email address was tied to that account.
You probably got some like Earthlink account you have
yes,
no more access to, right?
So, yeah.
All right, so it was a surprise to me when I finally figured out that you were this person online who was not mild-mannered, who was not even-keeled. This person was, at times, and I say this lovingly, James, unhinged in what was going on with NC State athletics. So what was this? Has this always been buried deep inside with fandom? Did the message board kind of allow you to tap into this? What happened?
Well, I think that what you're speaking to is indicative of what we now see largely in all of social media, which is the anonymity to a message board platform like that, where you're giving yourself a name, like Miller High Life in my case. Your actual name's not out there. We kind of got a taste of what it was like to be able to give our unfiltered opinions without the repercussions that might come from having to stand face to face with a coach or a player or someone who you wouldn't dare say these sorts of things to their face. I think it did give an opportunity for folks like myself who typically consider themselves to be fairly mild-mannered, an ability to tap into a voice and a way of speaking that they don't have a natural confidence level with in delivering, especially in the written medium where you have an opportunity to sit down, type out your thoughts, unlike a tweet or, some other shorter form of communication. A message board post could be one paragraph, it could be 10 paragraphs. Sure. It could be a whole screed on, whatever the ills are of our program on this given moment. And you have that opportunity to sit there, measure out your thoughts and deliver them, and then let people respond in kind and then fire back at those responses. And that's much more different than, vocally communicating where, like in my case, I tend to not speak in a way that commands the conversation. A lot of people tend to interrupt or speak over you or things like that, and there's a frustration that comes with that. So you tend to be a little bit more mild-mannered and not feel like you have to shout over people or shout folks down in order to get your point out there. Mm-hmm. A message board post can give you that opportunity to say exactly what's on your mind, how you want to say it, and then you give the floor back to whoever else is on that particular thread to offer in and weigh in with their opinions.
When did you discover statefans.com, the original version, or even accboards.com, which if through my Internet Archive pinging looked like it popped up in 1999. Do you remember when you first logged in?
I don't know that I ever participated in accboards.com. I think my first venturing out into an NC State message board was statefans.com.
Okay.
And so I, again, trying to search for past logins, I found one where it said I joined in 2001.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. So
that sounds about right.
Yeah. So it would have been early on in the statefans.com history. Mm-hmm. And I tried desperately to find that Miller High Life account email address. Again, who knows what it is? It's lost to time. But I'm guessing it was probably somewhere around 02, 03, if I had to guess.
Okay. And what was the community like at that point?
I think it was a lot of folks, much like myself, who were excited that they had a forum and a venue to kind of express a lot of these, opinions and thoughts. Mm-hmm. Obviously in an environment like statefans.com, you're talking with almost exclusively NC State fans. So there's a lot of echo chamber activity that goes on with that.
Yeah.
If you're pro coach or anti coach, there's usually going to be several hundred other people who agree or disagree with you on any given topic.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what the appeal was. I think the appeal was the opportunity to launch into conversations, and then from there, I don't know when the Brickyard, which is kind of the non-sports forum that appeared on State Fans / Pack Pride later on, jumped in, but then that suddenly spun into a whole different subset of the State fans who were on statefans.com. It was the people who were eager to talk with just anybody about today's events or social matters, social going-ons, and things like that. So it quickly evolved from just simply an opportunity to talk about NC State sports and became a much broader NC State community. And I'll say that, as that went along and it evolved, there were opportunities where I went out and met with some of these folks that I had made relationships with on these forums. Like we got together and played basketball or hung out and things like that. So it was this weird, we'd always call each other our pretend internet friends because they were people we had never met before joining these message board communities.
But did you have grudges with anybody? I mean, it's one thing to meet up with like-minded people, people that you seem to be friendly with, but there's flame wars, as they used to call them back in the day. Did you ever engage in any of those?
I'm quite certain I did. I don't know. I can't think of any memorable ones where I was like, yeah, I got a real zinger in on Bob Kennel or whoever, But and I'm sure, I think in our conversation leading up to this, that Bob was a name that came up previously. So
Bob is a name that's come up in this podcast. Actually, Bob is the reason why I'm doing this episode.
Okay.
This is because I ran into Bob at a Raleigh Sports Club meeting, and I finally put two and two together. I'd never met Bob before, but a last name Kennel is certainly one that you'll remember. I'm like, wait a minute. You're a State fan of a certain age with the last name Kennel? You wouldn't happen to be that Kennel. And he was... The line that he said that I'll never forget was, I left that life a long time ago.
Right.
And I felt like that was the best way of putting it, because it was a life. It was an online persona, online community, which if you play video games today, you understand, especially you have kids. I have kids. I have a 14-year-old who basically has a completely different online persona in multiple ways. But for us of a certain age, back in the turn of the century, it was new. We didn't have, we didn't have Discord and Reddit and various other things. This was it, essentially. So that's what I was curious in terms of your personas. You meet like-minded people, but you also would have grudges with that. And I guess you also develop a particular. I guess you develop a particular stereotype, right? So like we'll use Kennel as the example. My understanding of Kennel is that he was always pro coach.
Right.
Didn't matter what was going on. He was pro coach. These guys are going to turn it around. I believe in the players, et cetera. This would cause others to be like, Kennel, shut up.
Right. And I think that was just because of Bob's history of having played at NC State. Like if you came up through NC State as a collegiate athlete and then made the decision to hop on a message board to converse with other NC State fans, you're going to have a deeper understanding of all the ups and downs and things that go into any given sports season. All the you've seen all of the hard work and effort that's put in by the coaching staff, or have a deeper connection with what it's like to be a coach or a player. Something that us common fans don't have, and we're looking strictly at performance.
I ask this because I see this oftentimes in complaints about what I do, right? It's the classic case of, I never listened to the show, but I just happen to be ... and they've got a whole list of reasons why I'm terrible. I feel there is a hate watch component to getting on a message board, that you'd rather get on there to bitch than actually be happy about what happened. And I think I can verify this based on threads and the length of those threads, how many pages those threads will generate. After a win, I feel like there's happiness, obviously, great job, But after a loss, there's a hell of a lot more cathartic response to said loss and reasons why they lost and why this happened or why the coach got it wrong. And I'm going to tell you why I thought he was wrong. I feel like there's way more reason to complain after a loss than there is to celebrate a win on a message board. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say that I think the natural inclination to be negative online was definitely very evident early on in those message board communities. Because
why do you think that is?
I think it's just humanity. It's who we are, and I don't know if it's unique to today's age or the United States or what have you. But like you look at like Yelp or Google reviews or whatever. I know a lot of those platforms have tried very hard to get the folks who feel good about a place to engage as equally often as the folks who feel negatively about a place. But if you take your car to a car shop and they destroy your engine in the process of repairing it, you're going to take every action that you can to let the world know that, hey, don't take your car to this place. Whereas if you take your car to a place and they get it running in tip-top shape, you're going to feel grateful that they did that good job, but you're probably going to be less likely to go out there and leave a stellar 5-star review.
You're talking about a bad experience with a mechanic or a bad experience at a restaurant where you're, trying to have a nice dinner or whatever, and it came out wrong and things like that. This is just a sporting event, man. It doesn't affect you in any way. You didn't lose the game. Right? You didn't lose the game. So what is causing James Curl after a loss or a bad play to be like, this is the end of the world?
That is the million-dollar question that I've wrestled with for as long as we've talked. I think is, you have always been an advocate for me to not engage with the trolls. Like, leave the Goodmans of the world alone.
Yes, and you can't help yourself.
I can't. I've gotten better, I feel like, in my older age. But, it's you feel passionate about it because it's, I think for me and for I think a lot of NC State fans, our fandom, particularly our NC State fandom, is largely tied to who we are as a person. It's part of the identity. Like, hey, James Curl? Oh yeah, he's a huge State fan.
Yeah.
And you again with age comes perspective, and you realize that when you have kids and they start growing up, and you have real life issues that you have to deal with, whether or not your program or school that you identify with has success or failure doesn't nearly amount to much in the grand scheme of things.
So on the message board, State fans eventually becomes Pack Pride, but your desire to write even more or have more thoughts on NC State blossomed into a blog. Right? It was called Riddick and Reynolds.
Well, before that, there was, and this is such a 20-something, hey, look at me, I'm so clever. It was yet another NC State blog. Blogspot.
Right. That's
yes.
right. I actually remember. If I go back and I look at an archived copy of 850 the blog, I will see yet another NC State blog in the blog roll, which I'm dating myself even with that term, calling it a blog roll.
Right. Well, it was so long that I had to abbreviate it to an abbreviation, and even the abbreviation was a little bit lengthy. So
I feel like there's a transitionary period here where the message boards were ground zero for a lot of rumors, speculation, insight on recruiting, and everything else. What did transitioning away from posting on a message board to a blog do for you?
Well, I think it started because I wanted to kind of tap in a little bit with the my time at State as a sports writer. It was one of the things that I did when I was there at Technician, and I always enjoyed sitting down and kind of writing, thinking through, well, what did happen? Why did we lose, or why did we win, or what's important about this particular game or player or coach. And a message board post where you could create a thread and then type out your very lengthy post, but having your own space that you could call your own, that was made free and available by Blogspot, which then got bought by Google.
And WordPress, we use WordPress.
Right, yeah, WordPress came along and had a free version as well. That gave me and I think several other folks the opportunity where we could say, well, you know what, I don't need to have a message board to say what I want about NC State sports. I can create this own space. I can add the images I want. I can write a full lengthy post that feels much more like a sports news story rather than a message board post.
What is the one thing about that era from 20 years ago that would seem quaint to you? Or if you're trying to explain how things were in 2003 as we get ready to approach 2023, like a young NC State fan who might be engaged on social media, they got their Twitter account, they've got their persona, and it's kind of become a thing. What is one thing that might seem just like, wait a minute, what?
I think the Twitter, and there was some of this incorporated into the blogging right before Twitter really took hold, but Twitter allowed for kind of the idea of like a live watch along for a lot of sporting events. If you curate your feed in just the right way, and it's mostly state fans or ACC fans, then, if you're watching an event on TV and you're tweeting about it, you're seeing in real time everyone's reactions to that same event. Some of our, I'm sure, favorite Twitter moments are whenever there's a huge shot made or whatever, and you just look at your feed, and it's almost the exact same post in, duplicated dozens of times over because everyone is sharing a moment.
Sharing it, yeah.
Yeah. I think the quaint thing might be to tell someone in today's age that, yeah, we all watched the games, but then there was no live chatting that took place. It was, you might be in that, like they literally had things called game thread. And so you would join the game thread, and then every time something happens, you'd hit refresh, and then you'd wait for it to refresh. And you're like, oh, did someone else say something about the huge play that we just watched? And, kind of the same effect, but it was much more manual in nature.
It was much more manual. Well, I mean, I remember this is a quaint idea. The NCAA telling you at NCAA sanctioned events like a Final Four or an NCAA tournament game that you could not live blog.
Right.
Think about that.
Yeah.
You cannot live blog. A live blog was essentially an extension of what you were talking about with a game thread. You just would you would update the post with a timestamp to let you know it, like, oh, at 3:03 p.m., this particular thing happened with a quick commentary. It was proto tweeting, really, is what it was.
Yeah, yeah.
And you could update the game blog. Now, in retrospect, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, well, why would anybody refresh a game blog if you're watching the game? But I guess that's what people did. The other thing that I thought was quaint, and you might remember this, is if you missed the game or if you wanted to relive the moment, how would you do that today?
Well, I mean, I guess you would either go to YouTube and hope that someone had uploaded a copy of it.
Sure.
Or if, like ESPN and a lot of platforms now, like ACC Network, they have their own YouTube channel specifically for uploading game.
You got condensed game recaps. You can watch the full game on the ESPN app. I remember a time when if people wanted, like, hey, do you have a VHS copy of? Like, there were people who would tape the games.
Yeah.
And there was an interesting little black market of people who would share tapes in the same way that you would share live recordings of your favorite band. Did you ever participate in that to try to catch an old game?
No. I did have someone at one point in time reach out to me and say, hey, I've got a copy of Jimmy V's speech from Reynolds. Do you want me to burn you a disc copy of it? So I have a physical hard disc of Jimmy V's speech in Reynolds that someone sent to me through the mail. And of course, now it lives on YouTube and will probably be there in perpetuity. But yeah, I never did the tape trading in the same way that like Deadheads or Fish fans might, trade, like, oh man, this is 83 in Albuquerque. Witt was on fire that day. That sort of thing. No, I never got into the tape trading, but I'm glad that existed because I do think that sharing all those tapes then gave the material lived long enough to where it could get to a place like YouTube where it could then be uploaded, digitized and uploaded. So thankfully we do have digital copies that are online where we can go back and relive that. I thought what you were going to say is if I missed the game, or if I remember there being a huge game, I might be able to go back and search and find the message board thread where everybody was doing, like the game thread.
The game threads.
And then see everyone's reaction to those specific moments.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of that stuff is hard to find. In researching for this episode, the Internet Archive only has so many snapshots.
Mm-hmm.
And you might be able to find a thread that lives, but then if you click on it, it goes to a dead page, or it wasn't snapped by the Internet Archive. Like, I went to ACCboards.com to the earliest snapshot they had sometime in 1999, and I went to the NC State board to see if there were any active threads. And you see the moderators, which are like moderators that still exist today, like Beowulf or WTNY and Zeke, right? Like, these are I'm saying these names to Curl, and he's like, "Oh yeah,
I know this. Yeah,
I know those guys. I know those guys." I mean, look, you know, I know. I've gotten to know guys like Chaos Disorder, right? Another longtime NC State fan who's been a moderator on the boards. Point being, this is a lot of fan history that has vanished.
Yeah.
You know, it's newspapers can be archived. We can archive radio shows if you're diligent about it. But there's an entire subculture of internet fandom that is just kind of lost in the ether. Like, it doesn't exist anymore, which is probably for you a good thing.
Yes, probably so. There's a part of me that's morbidly curious to see, like, what was 03 James Curl tweeting anonymously from behind the Miller High Life account that I wouldn't dare say in today's realm. I mean, I did kind of purposely put myself out there in a way, but through, you know, the blogging and then the podcasting. So I haven't exactly been shy about the engaging with folks or having, you know, my opinions live out there and then talking with folks about it. But like anything else, as we get older and again, time, perspective, those things come into you as you reach your 40s. I'm sure there were quite a few just absolutely horrible takes that I had about whether it was, you know, given player or like, this guy's a bum, he's never going to go there. And then I'm pretty sure I never said that about Julius Hodge, but he was the first name that came to my head. Is like, you know, did I have a bad take on Julius Hodge early on? I think he was good enough early on to where I think we wouldn't have trashed him. But
hey, all I know is that I'm glad a lot of my early shows are not available anywhere. Just like your takes on some sporting events probably not available anywhere. That's a good thing. It's good. It's good for you and me.
I don't know if this will make the cutting room floor, but I will say, you know, it's interesting to me that, you know, like in much the same way that like early television, they never looked beyond kind of the present. And a lot of those classic TV shows that we think about, you know, like the Dick Van Dyke Show or some of these other like shows that were kind of recorded live, like, you know, a lot of times they would just, because tape was so expensive, they would just go back to like tape from 2 years ago and just tape over a new episode on top of the prior one, never archiving their stuff. And then I think a lot of people, as television became much more prevalent and they wanted to have copies of it, it's like, oh, like I remember this great episode of such and such. Where's the tape? It's like, oh, well, I hate to tell you, but we taped over it.
Yeah.
They did a much better job of archiving it. And in the same way, I think you discovered as you went back trying to find a lot of the stuff is that we always assumed the internet would just be forever because that's what we were told.
That's what we've always been told. The internet is forever. Nothing ever goes away on the internet.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it does. If a server dies, it goes offline.
Yeah.
There's no availability of it.
Right.
It's kind of weird.
Yeah, like a media company might buy a property like a Pack Pride or something like that, and then just decide that, you know, hey, we're just not going to keep all of that content, flush it because server space is more valuable than your memories.
Yeah, one day this podcast will not be available. Apple will decide we're just wiping the slate clean. Sorry about that.
Yes. I have tried to save as many of mine as I can. If, again, for only morbid curiosity, that when I reach the old folks' home someday, 40, 50 years from now, I can fire one up and someone can hear my horrible takes about Dave Doran or something.
Please make sure you archive the one where you got my last name wrong.
Yes. Well, the internet forgets, but Joe Ovius does not.
Full disclosure, I could have done an entire multi-part series on NC State internet culture. But I did call this podcast A Brief History of Triangle Sports, so I'm doing my best to keep this to a Cliff Notes version. But I couldn't do it. I could not cram in both NC State and North Carolina into one podcast episode, so I broke it up into two. So if you enjoyed this portion of it, focusing on NC State, you'll likely enjoy the North Carolina version as well, which focuses on two individuals who took online communities and decided to go out on their own, and really becomes a story about legitimizing internet coverage of college sports.
A brief history of Triangle Sports, sponsored by Copiers Plus, your local office equipment and solutions provider. Take the mystery out of your printing expenses by scheduling your free print audit today at copiers-plus.com.